Hey all, here OS Reviews. You're watching our hands-on review of the Kospet Hope. This is from a brand new manufacturer, and it's been making the rounds lately on social media. And it's interesting because it's the first smartwatch that runs on Android that has 3 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of built-in storage for a relatively affordable $140. Now, to make things clear, this is not an Android Wear watch, so it does not run on Google's Wear OS, but rather it's a full version of Android 7.1 Nougat. So you can think of it as strapping a smartphone essentially on your wrist, and you can even pop in your own Nano SIM card for making phone calls as a dedicated smartphone watch. But otherwise, it does have all the essentials, including built-in Wi-Fi, GPS, Bluetooth, and a 1.4-inch AMOLED display that has a 400 by 400 pixel resolution. So before we dive too deep into the performance and the UI, let's take a closer look at the hardware. So on the front here, we have a ceramic bezel, which is very shiny and reflective. It feels very premium, but this is by no means a slim wearable. In fact, if we take a look at it from the side, including the Amazfit Stratos and the TicWatch Pro, you can see that the Kospet Hope is a little bit thicker. So if you have really small or petite wrists, it's something to keep in mind. It uses standard 24mm watch straps, which is great because you can swap them out for a different design, maybe even leather, if you don't like the included rubber one built in by default. And the magnetic contact points it's used for charging. It takes about an hour to charge, and then this watch will last for up to 2 days of use before you need to recharge it again, with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth both turned on. If you are using it really heavily, such as gaming or doing a lot of web browsing, you will need to charge it at the end of each day. We have a quad-core CPU by MediaTek clocked at 1.3 GHz, along with a 8-megapixel camera on the side in between the two crown keys. We'll take a closer look at the image quality in a moment. The top key here is used to wake up the display, and it's pretty tactile and responsive. You also have gestures which you can use, such as flicking your wrist to automatically wake the display by itself. And the touchscreen here is still locked unless you tap on the screen once. The side here also features a back key, so if you're in a particular menu, you can tap on that key to go back to the previous page. So overall, the build quality and design are both pretty attractive. It reminds me more of a sports smartwatch, but overall it has very rugged feeling and is more expensive than the price would really suggest. I would say more than anything, it reminds me a lot of the aforementioned Amazfit Stratos in terms of its design, the fact that it's also using ceramic, and also has a pretty similar kind of set of crown keys on the right. The touchscreen itself has a slight curve to it, which makes swiping and interaction feel very smooth and seamless. So right from this main page, we can long hold to change the watch style. So for instance, we can swipe back and forth to find an array. What's nice is the companion app also gives you hundreds and hundreds of additional custom watch faces to pick from, including holiday-themed ones, such as for Christmas and for whatever holiday is coming out next. So there's a huge diversity to pick from. Now I can swipe from the bottom to the top to have access to my number of steps I've taken today, as well as through the entire week. I can swipe over to the right to take a look at just steps for today. The green bar reaching all the way around means I've completed my daily goal. I can swipe again to take a look at distance converted to kilometers, and once more for calories burned. I can swipe down to have access to the battery's percentage remaining. Right now it's about 50%, whether Wi-Fi or Bluetooth are turned on. Swipe over to take a look at my quick launch shortcuts for things like dimming the display, making it lower, and this is the lowest setting that you can set it at, and highest. Now this watch does not have a proximity light sensor, which is one difference with some of the other Android Wear devices we've seen in the past. So it doesn't automatically adjust its brightness. Next panel over is for clearing up the built-in RAM, and since it has 3 gigs, luckily you don't have to be doing that too often. You can be running 20 apps in the background and it still handles itself pretty well. And once more to take a look at your weather status and for refreshing it. So the interface itself is quite sleek. On the side here we have access to our notifications. This includes push notifications from social media, including installation updates that the watch may be doing by itself, and you can swipe through it to take a look at these updates as they roll along, and you can swipe over to get rid of them. And it's the same layout essentially as Android Wear, so it is a very tried and tested format that I think overall works pretty well. On the right is where you'll see your full list of applications, and there's quite a few installed by default. Since again it's running on Android 7.1 Nougat, a full version of Android OS, you do have access to the full Play Store, which means you can access and download many standard apps such as Chrome or YouTube on this thing. The only question that remains is whether you would want want to, considering the screen is still quite small, and again, since it's not Android Wear, not everything is perfectly optimized for a round display. For example, some of these apps expect you to have a square screen, so you can see some of the tabs and letters are occasionally cut off. And we've seen that before on past smartwatches running on a full version of Android, and it hasn't really changed here. So in terms of some of these apps are not going to be perfectly optimized, but at least you do have the ability to install them. Now, performance is still not going to be as fast as on a flagship level phone. That's, again, to be expected. It's a relatively low-end MediaTek processor being used. So although there's a lot of RAM, which means you can keep many programs running at the same time, the execution speed is still not going to be as fast as on, let's say, a Snapdragon-powered real smartphone. So that's something to keep in mind. So you still see some occasional jumpiness, but performance for the most part is already quite smooth and responsive for a wearable. Now, if we take a quick look at the camera next, again, here are some sample shots that I captured. The impressive thing is it's much better than expected. The only downside is it's a little awkward to have a camera placed on the side, because when you're pointing at something, you're basically having to shift your hand around sideways to capture the image. With that being said, it is functional, so you can technically, take a few emergency shots or use it as a spy camera in some scenarios, and this display does support multi-touch for pinch to zoom as well, which is, again, kind of interesting. So if we take a quick look at some of these images that I captured here, including these flowers, really not bad. And you can record video up to full HD resolution as well. Or if you want to share something quickly to social media, I would say it's actually doable. And with 32 gigs of built-in storage, you won't be running out of space quite as quickly as on many other devices. Call quality seems to be alright. I tried it out earlier with T-Mobile here in the Seattle region, and I got roughly 3 bars. And also the microphone does a decent job of picking up your voice. WebKit-based browser, which is standard with most Android devices. You can, of course, install Chrome or Opera, some other browser that you would want to use from the Play Store yourself, and you can see that loading up speeds are actually pretty good. And once again, many of these applications will treat it as a square display, so there are going to be areas and buttons which are more hard to press or hit because it's essentially on a watch size. But with that being said, if you use a little bit of patience, it can still be operational. So if we try to load up a page like the New York Times and see if it will render here. Again, the keyboard actually works better than I expected. And here we have it, the New York Times loading along. So for accessing some quick news feeds, it's actually more than usable. And here we have CNET loading along, which you can see is also doable, and text on this mobile version actually seems alright. The 400 by 400 pixel display is actually one of the higher PPIs you'll find from a smartwatch at the moment. Other things on here, there's also a built-in voice search, which is essentially Google Assistant. So if we tap on this, you can see that it's just the regular Assistant interface that comes along, and Google Assistant works really well. You can search anything on the internet, and it does a good job. It doesn't have the active mode turned on, though, so you can't just wake it by saying, again, hey Google or something to wake it. You have to tap on Assistant to do a voice search. What you see here as the Assistant function actually is assistant in terms of connecting to your smartphone, and after being connected you can use it as a remote selfie key for taking images using the camera on the phone, as well as controlling the music or files on your smartphone itself. And now we're playing back a sample YouTube video. Here you can see it actually is working. We have just a regular Android YouTube app here built on in, a little bit of occasional sluggishness, but functional. We can also full screen it, and that actually flips the screen sideways, as you can see there. Pretty minuscule, but it works. We also have access to, again, a few very light games that I've installed. Here is Stack, for instance, but it's not going to be the best experience because the GPU is still relatively entry-level for a MediaTek chip. And you can see that even on Stack, there is some occasional delay here and there. So not the smoothest thing in the world for gaming, not that you would really want to or need to game on a watch, but again, it is pretty impressive that you can install these. Right now we have a lot of open applications in the background, but it still remains relatively smooth when it comes to navigating back and forth. You can clear up the RAM, or you can long hold on the top key for a few seconds, like you were turning it off, to access the recent tasks. And that's how you access multitasking on this watch. And from here you can see all the open applications in the background all open right now. So if we want to, we can tap on this again and clear them off one by one. All right, so let's move into fitness next. Now this watch is rated to be IP67, so it's waterproof for short periods of time. For taking a shower, it's absolutely fine, but I wouldn't go diving with this. I wouldn't also take it for longer periods of swims. It's not rated to be, 3 meters or 5 meters waterproof, so make sure you keep that in mind. And it takes about 20 seconds to make a measurement. It's continuous, so even as I'm talking right now, you can see fluctuations. That continuous feature means if you're performing a sport, it will time your heart rate change throughout the entire session and push the updates over to your phone when you are syncing it up using Bluetooth. So it works pretty well. I did find the first time that it was a little bit on the higher side, but after waiting for about 10 seconds longer, it tended to fluctuate and move down a little bit and be a bit more accurate. Testing it and comparing results with an Amazfit Stratos, I found it to be very much similar. So heart rate monitoring, I would say, works quite well. In terms of fitness, the interface here gives you 9 sports that you can track, and it's very similar to what we saw on the TicWatch Pro in terms of the icons and whatnot, so it might be kind of imitating its app, but I'm not too mad about that because overall it's easy to understand and it works quite well. You can do outdoor running, you can do indoor walking, outdoor running, riding your bike, basketball, football, ping pong, badminton, and you can do jump roping. So those are the 9 sports that you have access to, and if I want to do a, let's say, indoor run, that's just going to turn on GPS and it's going to activate the continuous heart rate monitor, so that when you are doing a sport, it will again be trying to record your heart rate through the entire session and then sync that information over to the phone when appropriate. So it works quite well. And the interface here is very attractive and quite similar again to the TicWatch. Google Maps is built in by default, and of course you can use the GPS. You can also tap to look at specific spots on a map, as well as images and reviews. You can even call people, since a lot of these ads will give you additional information. And with a SIM card inserted or connected to your phone, since it has that built-in microphone, you can just very quickly communicate and access directions for navigation and for making phone calls. We Watch 2, and this is what it looks like. When you first open it up, it just tries to connect using Bluetooth, and once paired, you're able to see your battery percentage remaining. It's a very simple app, and the best thing about it is how easy it is to customize the watch face, because there are so many watch dials on here. The worst thing about the app is it doesn't really have a huge emphasis on sports. In fact, under health, you'll only find number of steps and your heart rate, which is fine, but you are even missing things like sleep tracking, which is supposedly built on in, and you can access a kind of sleep monitoring app from the watch, or you can install one yourself from the Play Store, and it works because it has that built-in accelerometer. All the hardware is there. It's just the software integration doesn't have that built-in sleep tracking, which syncs over to the app, which can be a little bit annoying. Syncing at least is pretty good. After turning on Bluetooth, it will automatically sync, and it takes only about 10 seconds to complete it. But as far as giving you the most exhaustive features, especially in terms of fitness, it isn't completely there. So you'll need to probably try out another application yourself if you want to do more exhaustive sports tracking. So that's been the Kospet Hope. I think it's a very interesting smart watch and also a great first attempt, considering this is a new company that we've never heard of or seen in the past. It has great specs for the price. $140 is even cheaper than many budget smartwatches running on Android Wear, which typically has only 512 megabytes of RAM compared to 3 gigs and only about 4 gigs of storage compared to 32 gigs on this, in addition to all the features they've built on in, including a SIM card slot, and overall a pretty good custom interface on top of Android, just making things as optimized as possible. Downsides would be the fact that, again, in terms of sports tracking, I do like the app on the watch, and the sensitivity and accuracy are both pretty good, but the companion for the phone is a little bit limited in terms of details and graphs that you can see. But it has a built-in camera, and there's a lot of neat things you can do. So the hardware itself is definitely very powerful, and there's a lot of potential, especially if you really enjoy playing around with your gadgets and unlocking its potential by downloading your own apps and programs. With that being said, for the average consumer, it's a little tough to say whether this is absolutely better than, say, an Amazfit Stratos or a TicWatch, because those work really well and they give you the essentials of what you need, which is notifications and sports tracking on your wrist. This thing does a lot more. It gives you access to full apps, which you can, again, install games and a ton more content, but whether or not you would really want to on something so tiny is another matter. So it's very cool, of course, from a technological perspective. For the average consumer, one of those other watches might be more practical. However, at this price, again, it's really hard to complain considering it's going to be cheaper than even many Android Wear options, but giving you more features and also a very premium build. So if you are interested, I would say it's actually a pretty decent option to consider, especially if you want to consider something that is not only going to be for notifications, but is essentially a smartphone strapped onto your wrist. So you can check out more details in the links down below, but for now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the interesting Kospet Hope